as a chef, you have to be curious by nature and, you know, always asking why or how or where does it come from. And I just feel like it just never stops learning.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. During the last few years, there have been many hospitality professionals that have sought temporary work in other fields while the industry was in disarray. From butchering to baking, stacking supermarket shelves and working the land, there are some that have found new joy in this detour and now see their career opportunities as multifaceted across different fields. Simone Watts is the head chef and farmer at Barragunda in Cape Schanck, Victoria. Simone, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. You've had quite a sort of career change and not as well in the last couple of years, but really put your hands in the soil. What's it been like?
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible. It was always going to be a temporary career change, and hopefully still is a temporary career change, but it's certainly gone on a little bit longer than I expected it to. But I'm kind of feeling like that's all happened for a reason, and that without that extra time on the farm, I wouldn't have got to know sort of the crazy, very unique coastal terroir over here on Cape Schanck. And, it's different to the seasonality that happens up in Red Hill on the peninsula and other areas. So I do feel a lot more in touch with the property now, having that extra time.
Well, tell us about that transition from chef to farmer. It seems like an obvious and easy link, but what were the challenges for you?
Look, it was really gradual, I think. I had always lived and worked in the city, but spent most of my weekends escaping, if you want to call it that, to country environments, to country restaurants, to, if I'm not in the kitchen, I'm usually hiking. And if I was traveling, it was always sort of to crazy, quite remote places. I did most of my training under Greg Malouf and a little bit of time at Pearl as well. So I think I've always been drawn to that Silk Route sort of travel and craziness. So coming back to the city was, I guess, becoming a little bit, I don't want to say a drag, but it just wasn't inspiring me anymore. And I'd been living in Sri Lanka for a little while, and I got back and I actually got in contact with Adam De Silva, who I used to work with at Pearl, and they had a job going at Tonka, and I applied for that, and in a sort of crazy couple of days ended up actually taking the head chef job at Coda, and had a great time there. And I think it was that job though, and I don't want to sound like I'm disregarding Coda in any way. The efforts that the team has put in there to implicate sort of more sustainable and ethical practices is incredible. But for me, it was just that turning point in my life when I really realized that a big city restaurant with high volumes and living and working in the city just wasn't for me. And I took a little bit of time off, and I think I went to Malaysia at that point for 3 or 4 weeks, and just threw myself into the jungle and hiked and ate delicious food. And I came back, and I remember walking through, I think it was Carlton Gardens or one of those gardens that's right on the sort of border of the city. And I got to that brink where there's green park and concrete. I almost had a panic attack. I was just like, I can't go into the city anymore. I can't do this. And I sat down with Kate Bartholomew a week later to resign. And before I even got the words out, she just sort of went, I know, because that's the sort of completely in touch human that Kate is. She's a beautiful person. I've got all the time in the world for her. But I think she just knew that I was at this point that the city just wasn't for me anymore. And after that, I pulled another little Houdini act and disappeared to Borneo for a while and helped a friend open a restaurant in Kuching in Sarawak. And then I went to Sumatra and lived on a 500-year-old mango farm on an island in the middle of Lake Toba, which is the biggest volcanic lake in the world. And I lived and sort of worked there for a little while, which it sounds very romantic, but it was quite quirky. This weird German guy and his Sumatran wife ran it, and I think I had fish curry for breakfast, lunch and dinner every day for 2 months. But it was probably there that I went, all right, you've got to start making some decisions. This crazy run around life can't be forever. You're not going back to the city. What are you going to do? That sort of gut wrenching feeling when you're traveling and having the time of your life, and remember that there is a real life somewhere that you have to go back to. So after that, I remember sitting there, and my family lives in the Mornington Peninsula, and I was looking at, I wasn't at a stage where I wanted to go back into the kitchen, and I started looking at biodynamic farms on the Mornington Peninsula, and I came across Transition Farm, it was Robin and Peter run Transition Farm, and they're just incredible humans and a beautiful place, and I applied for an internship there. And came back and decided to sort of stay with my folks and spend 3 months, because I wasn't earning any money, working at Transition Farm. And as I got to know them more and actually work on the farm and hear their stories and see the incredible connection and understanding that they had to the natural world, I knew that was sort of something that I needed to spend more time around. And it actually inspired a dinner series that I then went on to do. And instead of just working at Transition Farm, I also volunteered at 3 other farms down here. Wollumbi Farm at the time, which is now sadly closed, which is an organic free-range pork farm, and Main Ridge Dairy, which is sadly having a little vacation at the moment as well. But so I volunteered at the farms in exchange for produce that we then put a dinner series on at Montalto to sort of celebrate the farmers and the peninsula. And I guess that's when I knew that I'd found my place and my people. But in saying that, then the little gypsy in me went, what's next? And I was using a lot more natives at that stage, and really sort of falling in love with a lot of the coastal natives that you find down here on the peninsula. But there's still a rainforest baby in me. It's still, my heart is always, a small part of it is always in the jungle or rainforest somewhere. And I was doing a lot of research for sort of just different native fruits that I wasn't aware of. And everything I was looking at was Far North Queensland, Far North Queensland, Far North Queensland. And so I went online and just had sort of a look at what jobs were up there. And coincidentally, there was a job going at a native fruit farm that also sort of made a series of preserves and whatnot. So I took the job and moved to the Atherton Tablelands in Far North Queensland. And I spent a year working a bit on the farm, but largely making their preserves. The company Rainforest Bounty, they're an amazing group of people that they don't just sort of grow native fruit. They also work with local farmers in growing seedlings themselves and selling them on to try and regenerate old dairy farms into native fruit forests, which in turn creates food for different endangered species like the cassowary and different other bird life. So I think it was the first time that I'd really heard the words regenerating instead of just sustainable. And I realised that what I'd been doing, what I'd been trying to do of just kind of doing the right thing and moseying along was never going to be enough, that we really needed to give back to the natural world, and that as a chef I had been taking for a very long time, and I wanted to be a part of learning more about that. So stayed with them for a while, but I think I got to a point where I was missing cooking and I was missing being creative. And at that point, a job came up at the Daintree Eco Lodge as their executive chef. And I went in there for a few years, and I think, that was where everything came together. I could be connected to the natural world, I could be creative. It was small scale as well, so I could talk to the diners, I could tell the story of the farmers, of the food, and then it all sort of made sense, except for the fact I was a really long way away from my family. And I'm very close to my family. I love them dearly. So after about 3 years or so, it was actually longer than that, with sort of the time in the Tablelands as well and another little stint overseas in between. It was time to come home, and I got in touch with Hayley Morris, who owns the Daintree Eco Lodge, but also the farm down here. And she'd always sort of said, come and see the farm when you get home. And I'd always had it in my head that it was going to be a little farm. And I got here, and it's 1,000 acres with 600 mature orchard trees, 2 market gardens, and enough space to graze pork. We're also doing lamb and cattle already. And I sort of went, Hayley, we need to share this place with the world. And that's when the plans went in place for Barragunda. And then a little pandemic happened in between. And so the planning process, along with the joys of negotiating stuff with council, has made things stretch out a little bit longer than we'd planned. But that's the very long-winded story of, I guess, how I got to getting my hands dirty as well as starting a restaurant.
Well, I want to explore Barragunda shortly, but what's this fascination with rainforest? Do you have stories of your immersing yourself in Borneo and Sumatra, Sri Lanka, all these experiences?
They're just so wild. Just so, there's not, like, I've never owned a TV, and I would sit in our little, like, tiny apartment thing that looked out over the beach, not far from the Daintree rainforest. And we'd turn the lights off at night, and there'd be like this big glass window looking outside. And rather than a TV, we would literally, this sounds a bit pathetic, but we would literally just sit and watch this glass window, and things would fly in every night that you just go, what the fuck is that? And there'd just be like bugs or frogs, or, you get a call and there'd be a python in the roof, or, a bush turkey would run through the kitchen. And I just love that craziness and that. And I love the heat. I hate the cold. But everything is just big and lush and grows quickly and has this I think it just always reminds me of how small I am and how incredible Mother Nature is.
Take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family when you were a kid?
I think, I grew up in a pretty standard country Australian family. My family has always loved to eat, but I don't know whether, we were never really exposed to localised farms and things. I lived in Gippsland, but sort of more industrial Gippsland. But my dad was a very keen fisherman, still is. And I think although there wasn't necessarily that connection to growing our own food as much, they always taught me to respect food and to love food and to share food, I think, as well. I've got this memory as a kid of whenever we'd go fishing and we'd catch too much, my dad would get the little paper plate with the flathead fillets, and he'd make me take it around to our next door neighbours to give it to them. I remember as a kid hating it. I was so embarrassed that Dad would make us go to the next door neighbours, but he wasn't, he was teaching us to only take what you need and to only and to respect food, and that seafood there wasn't going to be around forever. And I really respect them for that.
What was the lure for you to move into hospitality, and what were those first few years like for you?
I actually never wanted to be a chef. It was never ever on my radar. I think I did home economics at school, but that was only so I could eat little sponge cakes on the way home in the bus because I was a piglet, not because I wanted to cook. I always wanted to be a graphic designer. I did all of art-based subjects in Year 12 and applied for graphic design after I finished. And I didn't actually end up getting into the course that I wanted, and I was doing a design internship at the time. And I was working at a little cafe on the weekend just to pay my rent and live in the city. And I was doing this internship, and I'd go in the day, and I would sit in front of the computer for 8 hours designing really boring business cards and just nonsense stuff that, you have this romantic notion of what being a designer is going to be like when you're a kid, and it wasn't really that. And on the weekends, I was working at this crazy cafe with this chef that had travelled the world and had all of these great stories, and we'd have a laugh, and there was this camaraderie. And I remember calling Mum and Dad and going, I don't think I want to do design anymore. And they're like, awesome. We were really glad that we paid for all of that design, all of that stuff through school. And that's all we had to listen to for the last 5 years. And I said, I think I'm going to be a chef. And I just, they had never heard me talk about it up until then. And I think they probably thought I was crazy. But that lifestyle of being on my feet, I get bored really easily. And I have the attention span of a boiled carrot. So I really like to just be doing different things. And I So this the guy I was working with actually had a friend who needed an apprentice. So I finished my design internship in the day, and I did the first year of my apprenticeship at night at this little restaurant in the city. And then from there this is really what I want to do. And that's when I went to Pearl and then on to Momo, where Greg took me under his wing. And I've just never had a mentor like that. I don't think a mentor like that exists. It's such a shame that he's on the other side of the world now. He used to get whole lambs in with the apprentices and we'd get a lamb and he'd get a lamb and sit us down and break them down slowly with us. And you just don't have people that take that time and care anymore. He really, I think, taught me to be passionate about food, and also taught me a lot about managing other people and being empathetic as a manager.
What sort of impact has this exploration that you've had into different rainforests and the food, tropical food, what sort of impact has it had on your cooking?
It makes me miss it a lot being down here. I am pretty strict in sort of my hyper-local philosophies when it comes to food. So when I am back down here, I'm not using Davidson plum or green ants and things that you would get from up north, because I don't know, I think after being very spoilt and having green ant nests in my backyard or picking Davidson plums on the way to work, it makes it feel like I'm disrespecting them if I'm getting them in a Ziploc Cryovac bag frozen from a veg supplier. So I tend to stick to using stuff that's down here, and we have a lot of beautiful natives down here and a lot of beautiful produce down here. But I definitely miss the lush tropical, like I'd go to Mossman Market up there every week, and every week there would be a different fruit or something come into season that I'd never used before. So I miss that. I think I'm more familiar with things down here. So I miss that excitement working with tropical veg for sure.
Are there any tropical fruits or veg that you can tell us about, any sort of tips or techniques that you did learn, given that most chefs don't really know how to use them?
Look, a lot of them you probably couldn't get quite regularly, but I used to really like using a fruit called a black sapote. It's also called the chocolate pudding fruit, and you get it and you have to wait until it's really, really ripe, and the inside of it is the texture and consistency of a chocolate pudding. And when folded through ganache, or we used to do just a soft scented simple chocolate pudding with it, but the center was the actual flesh of this chocolate sapote fruit, and it's just got the most unique flavor and texture. And then probably a lot of the myrtles and stuff up there as well, lemon myrtle and cinnamon myrtle are things that I think it's not so much learning how to use them, it's how to recognize them in their natural environment. I very rarely would be ordering any of these things from a property. Most of them would be foraged. So it takes that little bit of research and time to when you're hiking, be looking at things. And I think most chefs are curious by nature, but if you're going to forage and if you're going to use native produce, I think you really need to start asking more questions about what's around you, and my thing is usually, can I eat this? Is this going to kill me? Because there is a lot of native rainforest fruits that will. So
sustainability has always been at the heart of what you do, but you mentioned your experiences in the tropics changed that sort of thought pattern towards regenerating. Tell us about regenerating and the experiences that you've had and learnings. Yeah,
well, I think it just goes back to the fairly simple philosophy of giving back. I think, we're long gone on being able to continue on a sustainable level because we haven't been sustainable. We've taken too much. We need to give back. And on a chefing level, if you're just in the kitchen, that can be difficult. But when you're working the land, I think you start to sort of see the bigger picture. And for me, it's that I'm never just growing vegetables. I'm growing an entire soil system underneath the earth, and I'm trying to create a biodiverse family amongst my market garden area. I've got 2 hedgerows that I've been working on for the last 2 12 months, sort of in the middle of where I grow my veggies. And they've got everything from native edibles to companion plants for bees to medicinal plants to plants that I know are perennial and have deep root systems, because we're growing in really sandy soil here. So I need to create sort of, a denser soil web underneath so that imparts nutrient density to my actual veggies. But then, in the last 12 months, I've seen this wave of new animals coming into the garden. There's always 5 or 6 or 7 different species of birds hopping around with me when I'm harvesting. A blue-tongued lizard ran past me yesterday, which means, he's in there eating the snails. And when you start to create that system, then things like, herbicides and pesticides, which we don't use anyway, we're completely organic, but there's just no need for them because things look after themselves. And on top of growing veggies at Barragunda, a very large part of what we do, my partner runs a not-for-profit organisation called Reforest, and he's working on revegetating a large portion of the property here. We're fortunate to be in between 2 national parks, and we're hoping to create corridors in between the 2 that, could eventually bring koalas back from Greens Bush down to Cape Schanck. And so that sort of, we're not just here growing fruit and vegetables and grazing lamb. It is very much trying to give back to an environment that was colonised very poorly for many, many years.
You mentioned you like to operate really hyper-locally. Tell us about what you are producing and sort of the produce of the region as well that you've got your hands on.
Yeah, look, my overall goal at Barragunda is to create a collective. So we're a very large landholding, and to be honest, the size of the property is probably its biggest downfall because it is so hard just to maintain it, but access to land on the peninsula is quite difficult and very expensive. So we would like to create a collective here where we have different farmers that can come and lease space on the farm. And within that, it's sort of getting back to your question, I don't want to be a jack of all trades here. I think, there's people that have spent years mastering their craft, whether that's raising pigs, whether that's cut flowers or micro dairies, what have you. I don't want to try and do it all. I would rather try and give people the access to space to do that, and then in turn create a real sense of space and pride for the Mornington Peninsula. I think that's something as chefs, as consumers, that we've really lost. I think, once upon a time, when people lived on the land, they lived from it, and they had this respect and a sense of place. It was their home. And I think because, the peninsula especially, there's so many people that just come down here for weekends and stuff. There's that loss of gratefulness for how lucky we are to be able to produce so much food down here. So I would really like to try and instill that a little bit more with people on the farm. We have 2 acres of market garden. I only run a very small part of that because it's just me in between events and my hands not being able to pull weeds out fast enough. If I tried to do any more, I'd be in trouble. And then we have, so we've got avocados, olives, figs, quince, nectarines, peaches, cherries, apples, pears, hops, almonds, and then a very large native vegetation area as well that I utilise a lot from. And then we're also sort of on the back beaches, so I can take the quad bikes down to Bushrangers Bay and sort of forage in some of the areas that are outside of the national park spaces. And then we have cattle and lamb at the front, but we're hoping to get someone on to run pigs and probably get some guys in as well to look at doing some charcuterie work in the kitchen. I love the idea of the kitchen being a collective as well. We're only going to run 4 days, and if there's that space in the kitchen and that idea where people can sort of come in and out and produce different things and work together rather than just having that simple format or roster system of a kitchen where everyone's trying to do everything. It's like, well, if the kitchen's closed Monday, Tuesday, why can't a couple of guys come in and have their dry ages there and make their charcuterie and not try and be factoring that into busy services and prep levels? I think that's something that this time off has given a lot of chefs of like, how are we going to do this better? How can we be more productive, more economic, look after our staff? No one's pushing the 7-day week thing anymore. And, things like set menus and stuff like that. It's given us time to, I think, just run things a bit smarter.
The circumstances of the last couple of years have left you in some ways sort of kitchenless. What have you enjoyed about that?
Not doing the dishes by hand. Look, I think it has just been that time off to learn more about the property, but also time off to collaborate. I think like a lot of, well, most chefs that are running kitchens, that's all we have time to do. You're trying to manage staff and write menus and prepare them and cook them and have service, and there's not really much time outside of that if you want to have a bit of social life and downtime to think about collaborating and doing bits and pieces. And there's been so many chefs this last 24 months that have been kitchenless, and I really loved watching everyone sort of be like, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to do this together? Hey, can we maybe do something together? Or, working on farms or doing crazy pop-ups. And so I've enjoyed having that time to really work with other people that I would never have had the time or headspace to do. So I think, when I go back to running a kitchen full-time, there will be a sense of like missing that. I'm sure there's a lot of chefs feeling the same way, that are just all taking on new roles going, oh, I can't just pop over here for 3 months or do this now for that. So, that's certainly a positive that's come out of it all.
You mentioned the importance of events in your new role there. Do you have any events that you can tell us about and sort of what your cooking is like now that you've immersed yourself into that sort of local environment?
Yeah, I'm working on a really fun collaboration at the moment with Red Hill Vineyard, who are a beautiful organic vineyard up in Red Hill, obviously. They've been custodians of the land there, don't quote me, but I think for a little over 6 or 7 years, and they've been transitioning what was quite a well-known winery, but a winery that doesn't use the grapes from there anymore, into organic practices. And they make 2 stunning Chardonnays and 2 Pinots. And they came to me a little while back wanting to do something together to launch their first vintage. So they do everything very slowly. Their first vintage was from 2019 and they're only just releasing it now. So they wanted to create some sort of event to release the wines, and that was kind of pre everything hitting the fan, and we were going to do a little sort of tasting restaurant in their shed and keep it really rustic. And then it kind of went to, well, maybe people are only going to be able to dine outside. And Lee had the owner of the property had this crazy idea to do like a long lunch in the middle of the vines, and to set up a kitchen in the middle of the vines. And I said, well, I don't really want to run power leads and all that sort of stuff down. So let's try and do the whole thing over fire. So we bought a little Pig and Pilgrim grill, which has been amazing. And he's built this crazy deck in the middle of the vines. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's still sort of invitation only, because it's looking at building up the profile of their wine brand. But we're hoping with a few licensing and getting things across the line with council soon, we might be able to push that a little bit further. But so I'm cooking for 12 people over fire in the middle of the vines a couple of times a week at the moment. And it has like this view that looks out over Western Port Bay, and it's just ridiculous. Like some days I just sit there going, am I even working? This is just too beautiful to be true. And their wine is just glorious. So yeah, those sort of experiences are pretty special at the moment to have the time to do that.
Cooking over fire has its own challenges dealing with the natural elements. What's that been like for you, and what have you been cooking that you've really loved?
Look, I think like I have a sort of standard menu that I work on, and look, that was one of the sort of big things learning as well when it comes to growing all of your own food. I knew that I was going to be doing this collaboration over spring and summer. So I actually wrote the menu for it 4 months ago, because I'm seeding everything, it's like, all right, I know that I'm going to have 2 events a week, and I need this many kohlrabi and I need this many that. So I have to succession. So from 4 months prior so I can make sure that I have the veggies there ready for the event. So that's been a very different, it's not like, what do I need the next day? Call my veg supplier and they drop it off. I really have to have a lot of pre-thought with my menu writing, but I always leave a couple of side dishes open to kind of put on whatever's glorious that morning on the farm. So I'll just go out and harvest those things and whatever, is going to work well with fire, which there's so much around at the moment. And then the main course is always Barragunda lamb on the spit. So we've got a little rotisserie on the Pig and Pilgrim. So I love working with, and the other great thing is being able to move through the whole animal as well. It's not sort of like a set shoulder every time. So sometimes I'll just do the saddle or the shoulder or the leg on skewers. So it's nice to have that flexibility and be able to use the produce from here. So yeah, it's kind of how it rolls out each week.
You've had the most extraordinary experiences all over the globe, and we've hardly touched on any of them. But what is it that you love about what you do?
That I never get bored, that I'm always learning. I think, like I said before, as a chef, you have to be curious by nature and, always asking why or how or where does it come from. And I just feel like it just never stops learning. And now when I'm throwing farming into that as well, sometimes I just have to close a part of my brain off and go, all right, I can't learn about irrigation. Irrigation is my, that's too much. Someone else can do that. But yeah, I think just never getting bored and being able to be inspired by different cultures, different areas, different landscapes. I love it. I love it.
Well, it's bloody inspiring what you are doing. And so please keep in touch. Simone, we'd love to catch up with you again down the track and see what you're up to.
We'll see you at Barragunda once it's built.
Well, I'd love that. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up down the track.
Thanks so much, Huck.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.